All right. And again, as I said, a lot going on Capitol Hill today, a lot to discuss. And for that, we do want to bring in a friend of the show, political analyst Rich Rubino. Always good to have you on, Rich. Thanks for coming on again. And let's start with this question. It's kind of a simple question, I guess, but can you just discuss the importance of the House Speaker? Why does our Constitution require that we have one before they can get to work, so to speak?
Yes, and unlike a lot of other countries, the Speaker of the House in the United States is actually a partisan office, meaning that they represent a party as opposed to somebody who's more or less symbolic. But basically, the Speaker of the House, in order for the House to proceed in terms of having sessions, having committee hearings, they have to actually vote on a Speaker. That's what it says in the United States Constitution, and the Speaker has to win a majority of the popular vote. The Speaker cannot of the members. The Speaker does not necessarily have to be a member of the House of Representatives. For example, Congressman Cooper of Tennessee, in the past has voted for Colin Powell, the General Colin Powell, for example. But basically, in order for there to be a House session, there needs to be a Speaker of the House, and the Speaker of the House is third in line of the presidency, and he's essentially he doesn't really run the day-to-day House. Usually, it goes down to the lower level members who will preside, but they do need to have a Speaker.
Can we talk a little bit about why Mike Johnson is facing some backlash from some of his GOP colleagues?
Well, part of it is because he supported a spending proposal where he compromised with many Democrats to get some Democratic votes. Eventually, Donald Trump nixed it. But there are some members of what's called the House Freedom Caucus. Now, what's the Freedom Caucus? That's a conservative caucus of the House of Representatives, and some members believe that Mike Johnson is not conservative enough, and he's too willing to work across the aisle with Democrats to get things done. So consequently, you have Thomas Massie from Kentucky. He's the only Republican who's been full throttle, said that he will not vote for Mike Johnson under any circumstances. He actually said that to Matt Gaetz, who interestingly was the person who led the movement against the last speaker, Kevin McCarthy. So beyond that, he has really no room for error because the House of Representatives is so close right now, literally 219 to 215, the closest it's ever been since 1919. So he needs every Republican to vote. That means that every Republican essentially becomes Joe Manchin, someone like Chip Roy from Texas, or Eric Burlison from Missouri, or Tim Burchett from Tennessee, or Victoria Sparks from Indiana. Those are the lone holdouts right now. And in order for Mike Johnson to get their votes, he probably will have to give some concessions. Now, one possible concession that some folks like Lori Boebert from Colorado said, what about making Chip Roy the chairman of the very powerful Rules Committee? Chair Roy is a very conservative member from Texas. He's one of the lone holdouts. That potentially could get every vote for him.
Yeah, well, can we also talk about, though, this instance, the scenario if Mike Johnson does not win on that first vote there? Are we going to see a Kevin McCarthy situation again where this took 15 votes in multiple days, or what happens?
Yes, that's what happens. You have to have somebody has to get an outright majority. In the case of Kevin McCarthy, he made a deal. The deal, which basically undid him at the end of the day, was that he would accept a petition to vacate the chair, a motion to vacate the chair by only one member. So essentially, Matt Gaetz then, about 9 months later, issued that motion, and Kevin McCarthy was out as Speaker. But that is what could happen. Kevin McCarthy's case was 15 votes. It could continue. It could be many votes. It could be many votes. It could be 7, 8, 9 votes. But that person does need to have a majority.
President-elect Donald Trump did endorse Johnson, though he's in support of him. But why is that support not enough to get him over the finish line?
Because you have to have near universal support within the caucus. So essentially, if 210 members support Donald Trump and support Mike Johnson, that means that there's still 9 members out of a 219 member caucus, and they are just extremely powerful, almost omnipotent, if you will, in that caucus, in the Republican Party caucus right now. So that's basically why it's really a mathematical game. It's a numbers game, if you will, and you need to have pretty much every Republican, save maybe 1 or 2. And Thomas Massie has already said that he will not be supporting Mike Johnson.
Rich, we do have to talk about something big that is going to be happening in Congress. You know, Mike Johnson warning that without a House Speaker, there would be a, quote, constitutional crisis. Those were his words. Heading into January 6th, that's when Congress, by law, is required to count the electoral votes for president weeks before Trump is set to be inaugurated on January 20th. Could this hold up, so to speak, if we don't get him in as speaker, we don't have a speaker, is that going to impact that?
Yes, theoretically, that absolutely could impact that. That's one of the reasons, I guess, to get this for that the Republicans are trying to get this done post haste. You do need to have a speaker. Now, that being said, there is a provision in the Constitution that if there is not a speaker, there is a speaker designate whose only job is essentially to gavel in the House of Representatives and then to gavel out the House of Representatives. Last time around, we saw our Congressman Patrick McHenry of North Carolina, who fulfilled that role until Kevin McCarthy finally got the requisite 218 electoral votes. But if there's no speaker other than that, there's really nothing that the House of Representatives can do in terms of conducting business.
Is there any way that the Democrats can use this slim majority of the Republicans' majority there to kind of advance their own agenda?
I don't know about advancing their own agenda because they simply don't have the math there. They simply don't have the votes, if you will. But what they can do is they can try to get concessions from Republicans. For example, if Mike Johnson has a 1-2 seat majority, and it could be 2 seats when those 3 members those other 2 members leave the House of Representatives, they could come to Mike Johnson. They could say, "We'll give you 50 votes. We'll give you this many votes if you're willing to compromise." Now, obviously, if Mike Johnson does compromise, he risks losing support from some of those kind of wayward members of the House of Representatives like Eric Burlison or Tim Burchett or Chip Roy, who are very much lukewarm toward Mike Johnson anyway. But they could not necessarily advance a positive legislative agenda, but they could make some sort of agreements so that some of the spending cuts are not necessarily as immutable as some of the Republicans want them to be.
One of my last questions for you, we touched on Kevin McCarthy again, how that took a while to get him elected to House Speaker. So Congress has been here before, right? What needs to happen going forward to get the GOP on the same page?
It's very hard. You have 219 personalities. Many of them come from extremely conservative congressional districts. Congressman Burleson, for example, comes from a district that went in the Ozarks of Missouri that went about 70% for Trump last time. It is actually in their political interest sometimes to go against the establishment in Washington. And in the case of Mike Johnson has become the poster boy for the establishment. Now, it's interesting, you're someone who's elected in Congress as someone very much anti-establishment, but just like John Boehner, just like Kevin McCarthy, once you become Speaker of the House, you're seen as the poster boy for the establishment. So it's in their political interest, I think, sometimes to vote against them. But so far, there's only one unreserved dissenter, and that's Congressman Macy from Kentucky.
All right, Rich Rubino, friend of the show. Always appreciate having you on. Thanks.
Thank you so much for having me on again.
Of course.